The Eastern Partnership is an initiative of the European Union governing its relationship with the post-Soviet states of Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine, intended to provide an avenue for discussions of trade, economic strategy, travel agreements, and other issues between the EU and its eastern neighbors. The project was initiated by Poland and a subsequent proposal was prepared in cooperation with Sweden. It was presented by the Foreign Minister of Poland and Sweden at the EU's General Affairs and External Relations Council in Brussels on May 26, 2008. The Eastern Partnership was inaugurated by the European Union in Prague on May 7, 2009. The first meeting of foreign ministers in the framework of the Eastern Partnership was held on December 8, 2009 in Brussels. History: the Eastern Partnership complements the Northern Dimension and the Union for the Mediterranean by providing an institutionalized forum for discussing visa agreements, free trade deals, and strategic partnership agreements with the EU's eastern neighbors, while avoiding the controversial topic of accession to the European Union. Its geographical scope consists of Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine. Unlike the Union for the Mediterranean, the Eastern Partnership does not have its own secretariat, but is controlled directly by the European Commission. It was discussed at the European Council on 19 and 20 June 2008, along with the Union for the Mediterranean. The Czech Republic endorsed the proposal completely, while Bulgaria and Romania were cautious, fearing that the Black Sea Forum for Partnership and Dialogue and the Organization of the Black Sea Economic Cooperation could be undermined. Meanwhile, Germany, France, and others were not happy with the possibility that the Eastern Partnership could be seen as a stepping stone to membership, while Poland and other eastern states have explicitly welcomed this effect. The Eastern Partnership was officially launched when the Czech Republic invited the leaders of the 6 members of the initiative. Meanwhile, Germany attended the summit to signal their alarm at the economic situation in the East. Russia accused the EU of trying to carve out a new sphere of influence, which the EU denied, stating that they were responding to the demands of these countries. And the economic reality is that most of their trade is done with the EU. Members: the Eastern Partnership consists of the post-Soviet states, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Georgia, Moldova, Ukraine and the European Union. The participation of Belarus and their president Lukashenko, who has been described as authoritarian, at a summit in 2009 was the subject of debate. On September 30, 2011 Belarus seemingly withdrew from the initiative because of unprecedented discrimination, and a substitution of the principles on which it was built 2 years ago. However, 3 days later Foreign Minister of Belarus Sergei Martynov refuted this. Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, European Union, Georgia, Moldova, Ukraine. Institutions and aims. The Eastern Partnership is a forum aiming to improve the political and economic trade relations of the 6 post-Soviet states of strategic importance: Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Georgia, Moldova, Ukraine with the European Union. Promotion of human rights and rule of law in former Soviet states has been reported to form the core of the policy of the Eastern Partnership. The EU draft of the EAP states that shared values including democracy, the rule of law, and respect for human rights will be at its core, as well as the principles of market economy, sustainable development and good governance. The partnership is to provide the foundation for new association agreements between the EU and those partners who have made sufficient progress towards the principles and values mentioned. Apart from values, the declaration says the region is of strategic importance, and the EU has an interest in developing an increasingly close relationship with its eastern partners. The inclusion of Belarus prompts the question whether values or geopolitics are paramount in the initiative. EU diplomats agree that the country's authoritarian president, Alexander Lukashenko, has done little to merit involvement in the policy at this stage. But the EU fears Russia will strengthen its grip on Minsk if it is left out. It is, however, assumed that in the long term, Lukashenko will become less important with time. There are plans to model the concept on the stabilization and association process used by the EU in the Balkans, including a possible free trade area encompassing the countries in the region, similar to BAFTA or CEFTA. A future membership perspective is not ruled out either. Financing: the EC has earmarked €600 million for the 6 partner countries for the period 2010 €13 as part of the European Neighbourhood and Partnership Instrument, constituting about a quarter of the total funding available to the Eastern Partnership countries in this period. The funds will be used for 3 main purposes: comprehensive institution building programs, aimed at supporting reforms; pilot regional development programs, aimed at addressing regional economic and social disparities; and implementation of the Eastern Partnership, focusing on democracy, governance and stability, economic integration and convergence with EU policies, energy security, and contacts between people with the aim of bringing the partners closer to the EU. Eastern Partnership and EU-Ukraine bilateral relations. Ukraine is one of 6 post-Soviet nations to be invited to cooperate with the EU within the new multilateral framework that the Eastern Partnership is expected to establish. However, Kiev pointed out that it remains pessimistic about the added value of this initiative. Indeed, Ukraine and the EU have already started the negotiations on new, enhanced political and free trade agreements. Also, there has been some progress in liberalizing the visa regime despite persistent problems in the EU member states' visa approach towards Ukrainians. That is why Ukraine has a specific view of the Eastern Partnership project. According to the Ukrainian presidency, it should correspond, in case of his country, to the strategic foreign policy objective, that is the integration with the EU. Yet, the Eastern Partnership documents do not confirm such priorities as political and economic integration or lifting visas. Ukraine has expressed enthusiasm about the project. Ukraine Deputy Premier Hoye Nimiria said that the project is the way to modernize the country and that they welcome the Eastern Partnership policy, because it uses de facto the same instruments as for EU candidates. Under the Eastern Partnership, Poland and Ukraine have reached a new agreement replacing visas with simplified permits for Ukrainians residing within 30 kilometers of the border. Up to 1.5 million people may benefit from this agreement, which took effect on July 1, 2009. Relationship with Russia. Russia has voiced concerns over the Eastern Partnership, seeing it as an attempt to expand the European Union's Euro sphere of influence. Russia has also expressed concerns that the EU is putting undue pressure on Belarus by suggesting it might be marginalized if it follows Russia in recognizing the independence of the Georgian breakaway regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Is this promoting democracy or is it blackmail? It's about pulling countries from the positions they want to take as sovereign states. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has stated. Sweden, the co-author of the Eastern Partnership project together with Poland, rejected Mr. Lavrov's position as completely unacceptable. The Eastern Partnership is not about spheres of influence. The difference is that these countries themselves opted to join the euro, Swedish Foreign Minister Carl Bildt said at the Brussels Forum. The EU's position on Georgia is not blackmail but is about upholding the principles of the EU and international law, which Russia should also be respecting. He added. In November 2009, Russian President Dmitry Medvedev dismissed the Eastern Partnership as useless. Frankly speaking, I don't see any special use and all the participants of this partnership are confirming this to me. However, a few days later Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that Russia does not rule out joining the EU's Eastern Partnership program. Russia maintained its opposition towards the EPP. For instance, after the Warsaw Summit 2011 of the EPP, Russian Prime Minister Vladimir Putin stated that due to the economic crisis in the EU, Ukraine would probably not join the EU. Instead of joining the EU, Putin offered a Russia-Ukraine relationship which he said would provide a more competitive and productive economic process. In May 2015, President of the European Council Donald Tusk stated that Russia was compensating for its shortcomings by destructive, aggressive and bullying tactics against its neighbors, while German Chancellor Angela Merkel said that the EU makes a crystal clear difference with Russia. We accept that the different Eastern Partnership nations can go their own way and we accept these different ways. Finnish Prime Minister Alexander Stubb stated that it is the prerogative and right of every independent and sovereign state to choose which club it wants to belong to. Eastern Partnership Civil Society Forum, founded during the Prague Eastern Partnership Summit in 2009, the Eastern Partnership Civil Society Forum is an integral part of the Eastern Partnership Programme and creates a significant and institutional platform for civil society organizations to monitor and discuss the developments regarding democracy building and human rights development in the 6 partnership countries. The CSF consists of 6 national platforms and 5 thematic working groups, which are represented by an annually elected steering committee composed of 13 members. The CSF meets annually to discuss the latest developments and to set their working program. The first meeting took place in Brussels in 2009. The last 3 meetings took place in Batumi in 2014, Chisinau in 2013 and Stockholm in 2012. The forum contributes to the implementation of flagship projects that monitor and facilitate democratic transition in the Eastern Partnership region and provides direct input and submission of written opinions and recommendations in the early stages of policymaking both in the Eastern Partnership and the EU, conducts advocacy campaigns at critical junctures, and monitors the implementation of commitments and agreements made between the EU and partner countries within the framework of the Eastern Partnership. The Forum currently supports 2 flagship initiatives including the Eastern Partnership Media Freedom Index and the Eastern Partnership Integration Index. In terms of its past advocacy work, the Forum has successfully secured greater funding for civil society in the Eastern Partnership and contributed to the design of the EU's roadmap for the Eastern Partnership Vilnius Summit in 2013. Currently, the Forum is actively campaigning for an EU response to the human rights situation in Azerbaijan. It is also preparing to monitor the implementation of association agreements between the European Union and Georgia, the Republic of Moldova and Ukraine. The linkages between civil society organizations in the Eastern Partnership and the EU mean that the CSF provides a framework for transmitting European values and norms. As a result, some scholars have attributed a socialization function to the Forum, whereby norms sponsored by the European Union are internalized by participating civil society organizations. Criticism: although the Eastern Partnership was inaugurated on May 7, 2009, academic research critically analyzing the policy became available by early 2010 research findings from a UK ESRC research project examining the EU's relations with 3 Eastern Partnership member states, Belarus, Ukraine, and Moldova notes both conceptual and empirical dilemmas. First, conceptually the EU has limited uniform awareness of what it is trying to promote in its eastern neighbourhood under the aegis of shared values, collective norms and a Euro joint ownership. Secondly, empirically, the EU seems to favour a Euro top-down, a Euro unregistered trademark governance approach in its relations with outsiders, which is clearly at odds with the voluntary idea of partnership, and explicitly limits the input of the other in the process of reform. Further reading Academic policy papers Moldova Euro Unregistered Trademark S Values Survey, Widening a European Dialogue in Moldova, Global Europe Centre, University of Kent, January 2014, Visegrad for the Eastern Partnership, Towards the Vilnius Summit, Research Center of the Slovak Foreign Policy Association, Bratislava, October 2013, Belarus and the Eastern Partnership, A National Values Survey Global Europe Center, University of Kent, October 2013, Building a Stronger Eastern Partnership, Towards an EAP 2.0, Global Europe Center, University of Kent, September 2013, The EEAS and the Eastern Partnership, Let the Blame Game Stop, Center for European Policy Studies, September 2012, German Foreign Policy and Eastern Partnership, Position Paper of the Eastern Partnership Task Force, German Council on Foreign Relations, February 2012. Books Korosteleva, Each, Natorsky, M. and Simor, L. eds. EU Policies in the Eastern Neighbourhood, The Practices Perspective, London, Routledge, ISBN 0415720575, Korosteleva, Each, The European Union and its Eastern Neighbours, towards a more ambitious partnership. London, bases Routledge Series on Russian and East European Studies, ISBN 0-415-61261-6, Korostoleva ich Vostokno Partnerstvo, Problemy I Perspektivy, Eastern Partnership, Problems and Perspectives, Minsk, Belarusian State University, ISBN 978-985-491-088-8, Korostoleva, each, Eastern Partnership, A New Opportunity for the Neighbours. London, Routledge, ISBN 0-415-67607-X, Whitman, R., and Wolff, S. The European Neighbourhood Policy in Perspective, Context, Implementation and Impact, Palgrave, London, ISBN 0230203885-X. Journal articles Korostoleva, each, A Euro Change or Continuity. Is the Eastern Partnership an adequate tool for the European neighbourhood? A Euro unregistered trademark, International Relations, 25, 2, June 2011, 243. A Euro 62, Whitman, R., European Union's Relations with the Wider Europe. A Euro unregistered trademark, Journal of Common Market Studies Annual Review of the European Union in 2010, 49, pages 187. A Euro 208. Korostoleva, each, A Euro Eastern Partnership, A New Opportunity for the Neighbours. A Euro unregistered trademark, Journal of Communist Studies and Transition Politics, Special Issue, 27, 1, 2011, 1. A Euro 21, Korostoleva, each, A Euro Moldova. Euro unregistered trademark S. European Choice, Between Two Stools. A Euro unregistered trademark, Europe-Asia Studies, 61, 8, 2010, 1267. A Euro 89, Wolfgang Tide and Jacob Schirmer, The Euro unregistered trademark S. Eastern Partnership. A Euro Objectives and Legal Basis, in, the European Legal Forum 3/2009, pages 168. A Euro 174. Korostoleva, each, A Euro The Limits of the EU Governance, Belarus. A Euro unregistered trademark, Response to the European Neighbourhood Policy. A Euro unregistered trademark, Contemporary Politics, 15 2009, 229. A Euro 45, Boss, G., and Korostoleva, each, A Euro Changing Belarus. The Limits of EU Governance in Eastern Europe. A Euro unregistered trademark, Cooperation and Conflict, 44 2009, 143. A Euro 165. See also, 2014 Crimean Crisis, Euromaidan, Euronest Parliamentary Assembly, Future Enlargement of the European Union, Inaugurated, War in Donbas. References. External links, EU Neighbourhood Info Centre, EU Neighbourhood Library, European External Action Service, Eastern Partnership, Eastbook.eu. A Euro portal on Eastern Partnership, Eastbook.eu, Eastern Partnership Civil Society Forum, 2, Eastern Partnership Community, Eastern Partnership Community, Europeanizing or Securitizing the Outsiders? Assessing the EU's partnership-building approach with Eastern Europe, the Eastern Partnership. A Euro An ambitious new chapter in the EU's relations with its eastern neighbours, European Council. A Euro Conclusions, Eastern Partnership Summit, Joint Declaration of the Eastern Partnership Summit, Conference Eastern Partnership, Towards Civil Society Forum, Eastern Partnership, the opening report. A Euro submitted by the Polish Institute of International Affairs, Marcin Angstrom-Epczycki, the European Union's Eastern Partnership, Chances and Perspectives. A Euro submitted by the Caucasian Review of International Affairs, Sebastian Scher. Currency FFER on Dominique Toxdorf, A Euro The Eastern Partnership. A Euro A. Euro CNP Plus. A Euro for Europe's Eastern Neighbours. A Euro A, K Perspectives, 4/2009. Sebastian Scher. Currency FFER on Dominique Toxdorf, A Euro The EU Member States and the Eastern Neighbourhood. A Euro From Composite to Consistent EU Foreign Policy. A Euro A, CAP Policy Analysis, August 2009. Polish-Swedish Proposal, Eastern Partnership, June 2008.